Okay, I think we'll get started because this portion will be about 25 to 30 minutes, and we'll have a 5-minute break for you to grab a drink of water, use the bathroom, and then we'll screen the movie right after. It's about 55 minutes in length, so about total time to the recital. So we'll get started. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. I wanted to get the thank yous out of the way in the beginning because this evening kind of functions almost like a recital, but a little different. So I figured instead of ending with thank yous, I'll begin with them. I want to thank my doctoral advisory committee, Dr. Klein, Dr. Rubinoff, and Dr. Pack, for giving me the creative latitude to try something radically different than I've ever done before in music. I'd like to thank a wonderful partner, Catherine Lupian, for your support and your piano skills in the program. You'll see her playing throughout. And then there are many of the collaborators in the film, Justin, Jimmy, several others here. Thank you so much. This could not have been done without you. And I hope you enjoy seeing yourselves on screen doing the thing. How often you get to kind of do that in this sort of weird meta setting, you know? So anyway, this project is a deeply personal and experimental kind of art that I wanted to create, and it was kind of hard to define or quantify as to exactly what it is. I settled on the term multimedia recital film because it kind of, in the context of what this is, it'll function like a film, but it has a little bit of flexibility in terms of what it's doing and how it's constructed. And so I thought putting a brief explanation of what it is, the philosophical artistic influences in front of it, could help contextualize some things so that maybe you get more out of a one-time viewing as opposed to watching a whole bunch of times. Like a lot of postmodern art, you have to watch a whole bunch of times. And I figured for a live presentation like this, we'll do something like this in the front. So I'll just get started right in here. The lecture tonight will comprise of 4 sections: stylistic and philosophical influences, the process and pedagogical benefit to the creation of what this is. So how did this benefit my own music making, my trumpet playing? How did it help me practice, learn new techniques, and apply pedagogy? This project facilitated a lot of those things. The programming itself I'll present to you orally as well. And also I'll have a bibliography QR code that you can check out if you want to see some of that. So I figured that would be a little bit easier to interact with than a dark room with a piece of paper kind of seeing what the music is. So I'll take you through, and it kind of fluidly just goes, so I figured I'll tell you what's on the program, explain why we chose the pieces that we did. And then finally, at the end, just to kind of get some orientation, the fictional setting, characters, and the form of the piece of media itself. There's just a little bit of information to go through to understand a few jokes, a few references. Because this actually takes place in the setting of a novel that I've been writing for a couple of years. And so just a brief explanation, some of the characters that appear are from inside the story, and the setting itself also is. So just a brief orientation of what that is will help with some context as well. So I wanted to list these names in particular and give them the credit they deserve for the influence that they had over the artistic approach and philosophical, influences of the work itself. And we'll only have time to, with detail, unpack Kathy Acker in this presentation, but you could put together several hours and hours on all of these amazing artists and people. Kathy Acker, the American author. Angela Davis, advocate revolutionary. David Lynch, American surrealist filmmaker. Akira Yamaoka. Who in here has played the video game Silent Hill 2? By a show of hands. Cool, a couple, so you've heard his music there. And some of that music is in the film for the purposes of associating with dreams-like sequences and kinds of psychological things, so his approaches are kind of weaved in there as well. The philosopher Camus, right, because absurdism is fun. And it's kind of deeply influenced my approach to a lot of different things in thinking, in artistic expression, and otherwise, just overall what I'm doing and interacting with various elements of music. And then, of course, Frank Zappa, the progressive rocker, and then also musical advocate from the 1970s and 1980s as well. So I wanted to start with unpacking the main artistic and philosophical influence, I would say, of the entire project. It was a writer, right? So the actual music itself, the visual approaches, I actually garnered from the stylistic offerings of Kathy Acker. So she's an author, American author that lived from 1947 to 1997. She utilized postmodern literary approaches, so I'll kind of explain what those are in here in a minute. And these are her words. She incorporated what she called punk aesthetics into what she's doing. You can kind of see from the way she dressed and the way that she, if you look, you'll see her in the film speaking. She gives off this kind of punk attitude and presentation into her work. So that also, this was one of the first times I had seen that kind of punk approach in a literary setting, and it was really exciting and amazing to read and see that this was a thing that happened. So the discovery of her work is a big deal for me. Her work focuses mainly on sexual freedom and feminism, and in particular decentralization and freedom of sexuality in terms of reacting against and pushing back against a heteronormative patriarchy is her main emphasis. And also feminism came into her work later. She describes this in the interview that I excerpt in the actual presentation itself. Her work was not initially accepted in feminist circles when she was writing because of its use of sexuality, and its particular its portrayal of masochism and satirical approaches on commentary. So, but later it became accepted, and there's been larger discussions on that since, of course, in the ways of feminism. So I wanted to kind of express that to you all. If you engage with her work, you will encounter a lot of that. And there are no trigger warnings in her stuff, of course, because it's a little older, so just a heads up, if you check it out, you'll hear a whole bunch of things. One of the approaches that she has in her art that greatly influenced what I wanted to try in this film is she experimented with this kind of self-referential irony of creating anti-bourgeoisie art within what she referred to as a bourgeoisie art form. Right? So she thought of the novel as a bourgeoisie art form in the sense that her work is very difficult to read and references a lot of things that a lot of people would not have had access to learn, especially in the time of which she was writing this stuff, the 1970s, 1980s, right? And a little bit prior as well. And so she wanted to use that discord as an expressive approach in her work. And so in that element, you can read a lot of what she does as very disruptive and very transgressive, but also consciously using the tools of something that she's reacting against. Right? And I had never seen an artist approach this kind of thing that way. It's worth mentioning that she was born into a middle-class, upper-middle-class family in New York, but she rejected the lifestyle in favor of punk and other kinds of aesthetics. Just basically kind of rejected her family, and a lot of her work talks about the process of her doing that. Right? That was a very 80s thing from the way that she frames and describes all of this. Right? So just an interesting discord there. The two main novels that influenced this particular project were an early novel of hers called Blood and Guts in High School, and a later novel called In Memoriam to Identity. At the break, you're more than welcome to come through and thumb through these. They're as much visual as they are textual to me. Just be aware of explicit images, of course. And yeah, so I wanted to explain Kathy Acker's particular influence on this project in a little bit more detail. As you'll see her in the film, kind of speaking for herself. I didn't want to necessarily take her words for my own and do it performatively that way. I wanted to, with the flexibility of this piece of media, allow her, right, to do that herself with her own presence and her own voice. So I chose to take that approach since I had the ability to do that in this particular context. Right? I mentioned earlier postmodern literary approaches. This is, if you pick up a book from this time that's of the experimental variety, you'll see all kinds of things that react against what the novel is, like you'll see in music with this kind of thing too. We're all kind of aware of it. So a similar, of course, thing happened across the art forms. You'll see in this particular case a fragmentation of narrative and form, disrupted timelines, randomization, sometimes dialogues just entirely broken up, all different kinds of things. Copying, borrowing, and splicing of texts. Some would even say, call it plagiarism, although you'll never hear her use that word. She'll actually just take well-known classic characters like Don Quixote and just use them in novels, which produces this really funny but also very interesting revolt against the tradition within which she was trained, right? So because she was trained in classics, right? So you have that element coming into this as well. Unreliable narrators. The text that you're reading, the perspective that you're engaging with, maybe not be truthful at all, and you can't necessarily take their word for it. I don't do too much of that in the film, but that is an element you'll see if you read this work. A textual self-awareness. The book is aware that it is a book, and it will play upon that sometimes, you know, and so sometimes the book will be using an approach that acknowledges that you're reading a book to make a point about something the book is saying, and you get all of these walls breaking, and it's very entertaining to see that happen. And if it's, you know, if you've never read something like that before, it's completely disorienting, because you're like, wait a minute, who's talking to me? Is it Kathy Acker? Am I talking to myself? What's going on? But, and that's very funny, of course, and produces some interesting discord and commentaries. Irony, definitely, all over this stuff. The use of it. So harnessing an irony that happens from kind of an apathy of a postmodern mindset and turning that on itself to do something with it. A joke I love to say about that is popular TV is such that popular TV that makes fun of popular TV is now popular TV, right? So this kind of winding thing that does this, that's only, you know, producible in the sense if you're acknowledging that, and then that particular mindset, right? And then finally, dark humor. Sometimes you'll hear that called, referred to as black humor. Very pointed, sardonic humor that is borderline not really funny, but it's intended to really jar you. Again, I don't do too much of that in the film at all. There's just a little bit of acknowledgement to that kind of expression, but I kind of steered it away from that. But there is a ton of satire from that time that hits like a truck. So if you're engaging with some of that, just be aware you might see that kind of thing throughout. There, so I unpacked a little bit of how text influenced this project, and now I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the logistical side of creating something like this, the process and what I had to do and learn how to do, and why this is really assisting me as a performer and as a musician in our time, right? All of the visuals were exclusively filmed in the recital hall. I did 9 to 11 recording or filming sessions that lasted from about 2.5 to 3 hours each. So you can add up how much immersion time I spent in a dark hall playing the music over and over and over and over again. So it actually facilitated some very intensive immersive practice.
Really it's about close to 40 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Just a lot of immersion in this kind of thing. The sound that you'll hear in the film itself is untreated unless it's an EQ. So I didn't add any reverb, I didn't do anything like that. Partly because I wanted to maintain that this is a flexible piece of media, and we are acknowledging the process of what a recital is at the same time as we're subverting it, right? The whole thing is edited in Adobe Premiere Pro, so I had to learn how to use that program. You can get it for a good deal as a student at a discount. So just heads up there if you want to experiment with the stuff. It's a great skill set to have. I was inspired by the film Everything Everywhere All at Once that was made in this program, and I thought, wow, if that team could make something that incredible, I could try to make something that looks decent. You know, nothing I do is as intricate and complicated as what they do, but I found the program and knowing how to navigate it is extremely useful skill that I've already used outside of this project. So. Filmed all of that particular setup right over there. So a Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra phone with a Zoom recorder that just actually has a Type-C adapter right into the side. And it produced a result that I was like, yeah, I can use this. Wow, I was amazed at the quality that you could get from a relatively cheap setup. Aside from the phone's cost, right, the microphone itself is $100, you know, so it's very accessible in terms of, in general, when you're looking at this kind of equipment. Right, that isn't as much of a barrier as I anticipated. I just needed basic costuming. Right, you'll see one costume that adapted wears, so that was not a big deal. And then the film itself plays. I encoded it to play at 1080p, specifically for YouTube at 60 FPS. So those are the specs that I chose to use. Because any of you all who watch maybe gaming streams or things like that, they run at 60 FPS or 120 FPS to get a hyper smooth looking video quality. Most films will, from what the research that I looked into on this, about 30 FPS, sometimes 23 FPS, as low as that, to get that cinematography kind of look. There are some of the clips that are from outside of what I did that do play in that fashion, so it created an interesting juxtaposition to see that. It actually kind of paints past and present, just from the physical movement of it. Right, so a little bit more on this. We touched on some of this, but of course, the repetition and listening to myself play. We always get told to listen to ourselves play. And I had never listened to myself play as much as creating this project, sitting there editing this stuff, listening to myself perpetually over and over again. On an entire semester, I got an immense amount of detail out of what I was trying to apply pedagogically by reflecting upon each of these clips. So as a graduate student or maybe as a future professor, this kind of project has a lot of benefit. And if you're considering the flexibility, right, in projects that either you yourself are doing or perhaps your future studios are doing, this kind of thing is a good option, right? I wouldn't necessarily jump straight to this without doing some live, traditional-looking performances just for the pedagogical element of doing that kind of thing. But after you've had several under your belt, this is an interesting option to go. Engaging with technology, learning new skills, we covered that already. You're freely able to incorporate other media. The flexibility and possibilities are endless. It's very easy to get things and include them, so you can reference, directly show a whole matter of things very, very quickly and succinctly and clearly, as opposed to a live setting. The spatial logistics in terms of booking halls, flexibility of musician schedules, we all get absolutely packed at this time. That eliminated a lot of that issue in this project, being able to record it over several weeks' time. And really, this is the big one, the reusability of the content that you generate from this. A lot of clips, and for those of you we interact on Instagram, you'll see a lot of that content in here. I was able to use that for my own promotional stuff, packing my YouTube channel, and packing social media things with content. So this kind of project generates that. And also, if you're at the point of job applications, you have recordings of yourself playing, so forth and so on, right? So there's a lot of different things that a project like this generates, content-wise. I just want to present the program to you. This is the music that will be included, right? So it opens with a transcribed piano prelude that uses some ambient music that occurs in the Silent Hill 2 video game called White Noise that I arranged myself. You'll then see a free improvisation that I did myself in response to that piano opening. Then next you'll hear Eclipse by Dr. Marissa Youngs. And that's kind of the first chunk of music, and I actually thematically connected them through a descending half step. That will kind of be a thread through that whole section, so it's something to kind of listen for there. Then of course we have the really pretty Satie, arranged by David Hickman, a very conversational, cool arrangement of that piece back and forth between the trumpet and the piano. The Prelude in E minor by Chopin. So Catherine and I did this one. We just added an extra exposition, and then I wrote a trumpet obbligato over the original prelude. And so what occurs is just kind of, again, a conversation in phrases between the piano and the trumpet. So this project also facilitated some of my own transcribing, arranging, and even elementary composing skills to make this kind of thing appear how I wanted it to. Followed by that, you'll hear a thematically connected free improvisation between Jimmy and I that we did actually the same day we recorded Catherine and I recorded the Chopin. Finally, the big chunky piece that's in this is a mixture of live poetry reading and musical response that I wrote called Wake Up. This is where the philosophical thesis of this project comes into play. And the way I wanted to present it is you hear the thesis of my own voice contrasted and alongside the theses of all the other thinkers that influence what we're trying to say. So it kind of creates this collective conversation on a central topic, which is the world that we live in today. I chose a small topic for that, right? There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of very complicated, very scary things going on. And I wanted to create a piece of art that responds to that in a way that's responsible, but I also felt that I had to. I wanted to and I needed to lend a particular artistic expression to that conversation that acknowledges the people that influenced my own thinking and gave them their own platform to share with you all, right? So it has a dual purpose in that sense. I wanted to share the thinkers, give them their own shout out, their names, right? So that you can also engage with them on your own. Kathy Acker, Angela Davis, huge foundational thinkers for me. Big deals out there. Highly recommend you check out what they do. Then after that, oh, and I also, the brief trigger warning in there, there is a particular movement of that in which you will hear me emulating the screaming and chaos of a riot. It is a little disturbing, but it's kind of short, right? So when it happens, if you feel way too uncomfortable, you can totally, quietly move out. Yeah, I don't think it'll be too extreme, but I just want to give you a heads up in case that's a triggering thing, right? You'll hear 13 alarm bells before that happens. So if you feel like you need to remove yourself at that point, totally feel free, no big deal, okay? Other than that, that's the only point of the program that kind of pushes that boundary a little bit. Then we return to Yamaoka with Lara's theme reprise, which is a reference to a particular character that goes through a journey in that game. And then finally, a response to the opening piano prelude as an epilogue that I rearranged using the same source material and white noise. Okay. Finally, because then we'll have our 5-minute break coming up. Thank you all for the patience of listening to me talk straight at you for like 30 minutes to get all of this out. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's awesome.
So, thank you. So this takes place in a fictional city of downtown in the downtown district. So you're in downtown. Yes. Believe me, the dialogue is very funny with that. And you're also at downtown university in downtown. Right? So you have this kind of layer of, right? Okay.
You?
Is that a name of the university?
It's a reference to the university I went to. Actually, Amy and I both went there at Georgia State University. It's located in downtown Atlanta. So it's a bit of a play off on that environment, actually. And in that sense, there's a little bit of auto theory, my own experience and observations that I saw, because I was there in 2020, actually, we both were, which was a very tough time for downtown. It was in dire straits, and there was a lot of suffering. So, and me being the kid from out west who hadn't lived in a big town before, that was a huge impact on me. And kind of radicalized my thinking and motivated me to get involved in any way that I can, right, in these conversations that are so important to have. The main character here, the hooded figure who is played by me, his name is Redacted TBD, okay? It's a bit of an ironic thing. That is actually his name. His name isn't redacted, it is redacted. Okay, and that happens in the story because he was forced to choose a new name upon his 25th birthday, and he couldn't come up with something fast enough, so they assigned him that name. So it's a reference to him searching for an identity in the world, of course, right? So he has not felt like he's found a name, right? So there it is. Because I definitely had that feeling when I was in Atlanta. The college students appear as themselves, including Jeff McKay. Okay. You see how the postmodern is trying. Exactly. You see how the postmodern is trying to break this apart already. Right? And I get a kick out of that kind of thing. And then you'll hear a reference to a Governor Click, who is a fictional ultra-conservative politician in my novel that's kind of the basis of a lot of the systemic issue in the novel that I create that emulates certain things, of course, in our world today. So when you hear the reference to that, Governor Click, that's what that means. Right. Brief note on the form. 4 major sections. You have the introduction, which correlates to white noise, the piano prelude, as well, and that comes as a response to the Kathy Acker and Angela Davis interviews, which kind of exist as themselves, not necessarily in my narrative. They just are there because they're important and their voice is extremely, they matter super much. Okay. Then we have a redacted interview, which contextualizes the musical response in the repertoire after, which is what I subtitled Melancholy, so that it opens with a very melancholy feeling. Then you have a second interview from Redacted, where Redacted has become politicized, and a musical response to that through Wake Up, which is displayed as fictional archive footage of a live performance in a fictional theater called the Kathy Acker Theater. Okay? So when that actually gets there, your mind can situate it as, okay, I'm seeing a document of a live performance that happened at some point, right? And the audience themselves, to play off of Kathy Acker's intentions, is a bourgeoisie audience, right? So you can kind of keep that in mind when you hear Redacted speaking to the audience and interacting musically. That's what's going on with that. Then finally, a musical epilogue that ends with that. I want to leave this up for you all. You can check it out. I put a bibliography on the Works Cited page, right? So if you want to scan it, it'll take you to a PDF, and you can have those. It's a list of all of these books up here, as well as some other YouTube videos of lectures. A recent one from Angela Davis on intersectionality that's extremely impactful, that I highly recommend you watch. As well as the interviews that I spliced into the piece of media itself, including the one from Frank Zappa. Right? So if you want to take a look at that, I'll leave that up for just a second. But that, oh, okay, right on time. That will ultimately conclude the beginning part of this event, so thank you so much for checking out this lecture. Let's take 5 minutes, grab a drink of water, move a little bit, and then when you come back, we'll turn out the lights and we'll play the thing. So, thank you. All right. See you in a few. If you want to check out the stuff, I'll leave them up here if you want to thumb through.